I know that a lot of people are watching reviews of Avengers Endgame wanting absolutely nothing spoiled for them, and if you want that type of review, then here it is. I loved it. However, a lot of that comes from my pre-existing attachment to the franchise and how jaw-droppingly satisfying the final act of the film is. The journey the film takes to get there has its issues, and there's no way on earth that this film needed to be 3 hours long, but I still had a great time. Now, the rest of this review will not contain any major spoilers, but I will be talking about character and theme. That's what I do in these video reviews, and it's no exception here. Also, because there's such a limited amount of trailer footage out there, those who are sticking around should not infer anything from what I say, with the clips playing at the same time. So, with that out of the way,
it's not about how much we lost. It's about how much we have left. We're the Avengers. We gotta finish this. You trust me? I do.
After 21 prior films over the past 11 years, a combined box office total of nearly $20 billion, it makes sense that Marvel Studios and the folks over at Disney would want to give themselves a pat on the back and have a huge victory party about their own accomplishments. However, I wasn't expecting so much of that victory party to be in the subtext of Avengers Endgame, which takes place after the events of Avengers Infinity War, which saw the Mad Titan Thanos trounce the Avengers and succeed in his plan to wipe out half the universe, including most of the Avengers team and their extended families. After a grieving period, the Avengers regroup for a plan so complex and bold that it just might work, which includes, amongst other things, a walking tour of some of the MCU's greatest hits, and also Thor: The Dark World, of all things. The film takes a long time setting up some of the pieces, and almost just as long actually getting them into action, with the first 2 acts being the definition of a slow burn. I know that due to the scope and scale of the MCU at this point that this was not going to be a short film, but I can think of at least 20 minutes of content in those first 2 acts that could have been cut, and you really wouldn't miss anything, especially regarding the new status quos for characters like Hawkeye and Thor, the latter of whom easily gets shortchanged here in a recurring gag that started off funny and then really just dragged the character down for the rest of the film. We know that Chris Hemsworth can be really funny, but he seems strangely off his game in Avengers Endgame, and the script does not help. Also, a lot of people will like what they do with Mark Ruffalo's Bruce Banner in this film. Unfortunately, I am really torn and was a bit disappointed with how he basically had nothing to do in the last act of the movie. However, regarding the rest of the cast, great work is done with franchise mainstays Robert Downey Jr., Chris Evans and Scarlett Johansson, who give some of their best performances to date in these roles, and the film does a great job at letting them relax into what's essentially revised versions of these characters after the events of the last movie, whilst still being true to what we loved about them before, and also giving them different but believable representations of loss and grief. In fact, this is another reason why Thor's characterization in the film doesn't really work, because even though I absolutely understand the intent and the meaning behind it, it's essentially the same arc and resolution as 2 other main characters in the film, just a less interesting version of it. But where Avengers Endgame succeeds the most on a thematic level is the sense of desperation amongst the team, as even when the plan seems to be going as smoothly as possible, a mid-movie reveal completely offsets the audience, but not the main cast, resulting in an approach to the third act which I don't think anyone in my theatre knew where the story was going to go, and that is absolutely for the best. It might be a bit extraneous at points to get to, but once we do arrive at the all cards on the table finale, it absolutely delivers, with one of the most epic and satisfying ending showdowns that I have seen since the ending of the original Avengers. There's a sense during the climax that at any point the movie is about to lose all sense of coherency, but it still stays on the rails despite some fan-favourite characters being present for the ending fight, but literally contributing nothing, so it's going to be a crapshoot as to whether or not your favourite Avenger gets a moment to shine or not. But it's hard to ignore just how ambitious the last act of the film is, including what could be the most intense game of hot potato ever committed to film, an ending so satisfying that the audience in my screening applauded, and a single shot that is going to make the Comicsgate type crowd so irrationally angry and annoyed that it brings me genuine pleasure in knowing how upset they're going to be as the rest of the world enjoys the movie, has an amazing time, and leaves them all behind. It also has 3 of the best shots ever committed to the comic book movie subgenre, and it brings me great joy to say that Captain America is at the centre of all of them. This is easily Chris Evans' best performance as the character to date, and while while there's one speech from the comics that I was disappointed wasn't present in the film, my disappointment faded away when I came to the realization that that missing speech is actually depicted here in a single stunning tableau of a shot with zero dialogue. There will be no specifics here, but Avengers Endgame does represent a new status quo for several characters, whilst also providing a definitive end for several others, and that sense of finality even spreads to the ending credits, with some characters literally signing off, which I thought was a nice touch. Though some of the characters who were clearly intended to move on to either new styles of sequels or new franchises in their own right may get treated well in a thematic sense, but I find it difficult to justify that approach if you take into account their presence in the MCU before this point. I know that sounds vague, but that will have to wait for a spoiler-filled discussion. I can't talk about it here. Also, on a completely unrelated note, I promise, Gwyneth Paltrow, she bloody brought her A-game here. Due to the plot's internal mechanics, we get acquainted to alternative versions of several key characters, one of whom being Thanos, and Josh Brolin absolutely brings it. Whilst the last movie belonged to him, with Avengers Endgame belonging to the Avengers themselves, Brolin still crushes it as a terrifying version of this character. Paul Rudd continues to prove himself the unsung hero of the MCU, Brie Larson is brilliant, and despite silly people's concerns and worries, she does not overshadow the rest of the cast, and there's one blink and you'll miss it cameo which will absolutely open a Pandora's box about what is and is not canon in the MCU anymore. So I look forward to those discussions over the next few months. Listen, this review probably sounds a lot more negative than I intend it to be because I really did love this film. It's just that a lot of the positives, such as the brilliant humour, the special effects, iconography and character interactions, these are all things that we've come to expect from the MCU at this point. But I'd also be remiss to mention that this film is completely reliant on its predecessors. You could watch all previous Avengers movies with only a passing familiarity with these characters, but I can imagine casual viewers who are walking into Endgame maybe having not seen Doctor Strange, Guardians of the Galaxy 2, or even the first Ant-Man, just having absolutely no idea what's going on. But I don't hold that against Endgame. Like, I wouldn't review the new series of Game of Thrones and complain about it not making sense because I've only watched 4 episodes prior to that. But I think it's worth pointing out that out of all of the films in the MCU, Avengers Endgame is the least accessible. Like I said, I don't hold that against the film, but I think it's worth mentioning. But I think that's part of the point. For those who have been following since day one, Avengers Endgame delivers where it counts the most by paying off and acknowledging the most well-realised fictional movie universe since the Harry Potter franchise. Its highs are astronomically high, its scope is awe-inspiring, and its resolutions are often thoughtful and profound. But I also think that the first 2 acts really do hamper its potential rewatch factor, and I do think in regards to certain characters, the film really does drop the ball. But conversely, I'm also one of those guys who really likes Age of Ultron, but acknowledges that while it might not be as tight or as cohesive a film as its predecessor, it's because it's trying to do and accomplish and say a hell of a lot more, so it's only natural that it has a few more stumbles along the way. To the film's credits, there really is a sense of finality to it. Even though we know Spider-Man will be back in a couple of months and Black Widow's getting her own movie next year, there's no sequel hook, no gotcha final reveal, and even no mid or post-credit scene. It ends the Infinity Stone saga in a really satisfying and crowd-pleasing way, and it excels where it counts the most. I'm giving Avengers Endgame 4.5 stars out of 5.
You could not live with your own failure. Where did that bring you? Back to me.